Hello everyone, this is Brenton DeFlitch, and we're back here going to talk about Tier 2 services within the RTI, Response to Intervention model. We previously talked about the intervention tiered system overall with 100% of students, and briefly what it means to be in each of the tiers. In this video, we're going to specifically talk about Tier 2, its elements. It's just a basic overview to get you started with RTI. Again, you can email me at bdeflitch@gmail.com if you have any questions, concerns, ideas, or just looking for some help with your RTI system. With our big question, we really focused on number one at the first video. Now we're moving on to question two, which is specifically looking at how are students placed and considered, movement between the tiers, and then also looking at what's happening in Tier 2 as a brief overview for that service. So Tier 2, let's go ahead and jump straight into it. So again, we're looking at our Tennessee MTSS model here, and we're specifically looking at Tier 2 here in the middle. This is roughly 10 to 50% of students if everything else is working accordingly at a high rate of efficiency. Now, these students are considered at risk, as if they have slightly more intensive intervention than Tier 1, then they should be able to be on or above grade level for the end of the year. Now, let's look over here at some of the key points about Tier 2 and what it means first. So Tier 2 focuses on specific standards and usually within the embedded skills within a standard. We all know that standards kind of have very packed together amounts of knowledge and information, and as teachers and educators, our job is to unpack those. So within Tier 2, we unpack all of the skills and knowledges in a standard and look at specifically thinking, okay, what element of that do students need more intervention on in order to accelerate their growth towards at or above grade level. Also, the key fundamental purpose is we're here to accelerate our kids. We want to accelerate to close their specific gap so that they can be on or above grade level and continue on their path to graduation, which allows them to be college and career ready on time with the majority of students across the nation. Now, what you're doing with Tier 2 and how it's different from Tier 1 is that Tier 2 services, what we're doing during that time, has to be research-based and evidence-based. Tier 1, teachers have, one might say, the luxury of looking at books, looking at some best practices, coming up with some new ideas to implement in order to intervene, to tutor, to spiral on their own. Now in Tier 2, what we need to do is, because there is a time risk here, we have students that have been labeled at risk, we need to get them back on track as fast as possible before it gets to that point that some might say are too late for some of our students, as we see in schools across the nation. So what we do is we look at the clearinghouse, we look at published research across all the databases, and we determine what are the best evidence and research-based tools to implement in our system. Now, some of those you can purchase holistically through a program and say, this is the program we're doing, it's the curriculum, we're going to open up to page 1 and we're going to work through this as it says for its research. And some schools don't have the money for that, so you can pull the list then and say, well, these are the specific elements that are research-based. Do some homework on your own and say, okay, here's the specific workshop model, or here's the specific intervention model we're going to implement on our own. But we're going to have to create and do some more of the hard work with the materials and implementation and training for it. The idea here is that we're implementing proven programs and structures, that if we do it right, we get results every time. That's the purpose of it being research-based and evidence-based. Now within that, and again, I do want to say that states and local districts might have some of their own requirements, so it's always important to keep up with local and state policy when it's regarding intervention systems, but RTI as a best practice has some of the very same elements across our nation. First, generally, is that Tier 2 is going to meet between 45 to 60 minutes a day. It should meet 4 to 5 days a week. The idea here is that you are progress monitoring about every 1 to 2 weeks. Tier 2 normally I've seen is about every 2 weeks, where you're determining, we work on this process for 2 weeks and we determine, are they responding to that instruction? Are they closing the gap? And then every 2 weeks, when we do give that progress monitoring probe or tool, then we are taking that data, which we should get quickly, and then charting it to determine how the student is responding to the instruction over our given period of intervention time. All right, so as we started with early on in the previous series, With Tier 1, the beginning of the year, September, we're going to give our universal screener, or our diagnostic assessment, as we like to call it, and we're going to see where each of our students fall in terms of grade levels. Then we're going to start with our initial tiers, which saying, all right, about 10 to 15% of students should be 1 to 2 grade levels behind. They start in Tier 2. Now, those students are going to stay in Tier 2, and this is debatable by some, but roughly the average is 6 to 8 weeks. Students are going to stay in Tier 2 to receive services. During that time period, they're getting their intensive intervention directed at their need. Every 2 weeks, they're getting monitored, and at the end of 8 weeks, there should be a kind of more extensive benchmark, or sometimes it falls in line with your overall universal screener cycle, which would be like winter and spring again. And then all that data is collected into a team, and that team is going to determine, has the student closed the gap fast enough, and are they ready to return based upon the data and their current goal line. So if the student keeps growing at the rate that they're growing at, will they be able to reach at or above grade level without any additional interventions? And so the decision comes down to the same for everybody. Should they remain in their current setting? And if they remain, will they be at or above grade level? Do they need more intensive intervention? So we move them into the next tier or the next bucket because their current growth is stagnant or the gap is growing. Or we go, they've made adequate enough growth that we can exit them out of Tier 2 and back into just Tier 1 intervention services. So that is just an overview of Tier 2 and kind of its work. You can see more details in my blog with the Grade Network later on. And what we'll do is we'll come back here and we will look at Tier 3 in the following video. Hope this helps some of you out, and good luck searching for some more of that information on response to intervention.